coast of South America was lost for many days. Suddenly, it sighted a friendly vessel coming along. From the mast of an unfortunate vessel came the signal, "Water, water, we die of thirst." The answer from the friendly vessel came back at once, "Cast down your bucket where you are." Thinking that they were in the sea, the signal came a second time, "Water, send us fresh water." Again, from the visiting vessel came the immediate reply, "Cast down your bucket where you are." A third and a fourth signal came from the distressed ship, "Water, we need water, we're dying of thirst." Again, answered the same way, "Cast down your buckets where you are." The captain of the distressed vessel, at last heeding the injunction, cast down his buckets from over the side of the ship, and up out of the water came fresh, sparkling water from the mouth of the Amazon River. This flow of fresh water extends miles out into the ocean in what's called the Red River. Though they were in the ocean, the water was fresh. Now, in the story of the ship, of letting down your buckets, there was an urgent need, wasn't there? Dying of thirst. I've never had that happen. I've been thirsty before, but never to the point where I thought I was dying of thirst. But the fulfillment of their need was closer at hand than they knew. Our text this week, which is cut up in a way that almost seems like it's a bookend to other stories in Mark chapter 6, that's why I invited you to read it, presents a whole plethora of needs, kind of in short order. Skipping two of the main stories, it sort of sews together bookends of how many needs people have. And so among the surplus meanings of our text, one of the questions is, what do you need? What is it that you bring into worship this morning that is not a want, not a consumer-driven thing, not something you want to buy, but something that you actually down in the gut of your life, you absolutely need? That's what the gospel reader wants us to access from all the surplus meanings of all the healings and signs of power in Mark 6. What is it that you need? In today's gospel, we really get presented kind of three ways in which needs are seen: a need for rest, a need for leadership, and a need for food. Though we missed that story, I'm going to include it today because it's important for our lesson. The need for rest. It starts off with the disciples coming back from being sent by Jesus to do their missionary journey, and they return to Jesus. And they report, it says, that's where our gospel started out, like in the middle of the story, it did, reporting to Jesus what had happened on this missionary journey that they had been on. They were worn out from the demands that they had faced. They were exhausted. Apparently, they had some food to share, but they never had the time to actually share it with one another, so Jesus invites them to come away with him to a deserted place and find some rest. It's also at the middle of this story, if you looked with me in Mark chapter 6, you know that a part of this story is that John the Baptist has been beheaded in Mark 6, and Jesus has just learned about the demise of his cousin John the Baptist. Think about the ways in which you need refreshment. If you've ever been a person of grief, you know how much you need rest. You know how much you need refreshment. And that Jesus invites them into. They must not have been very good sailors because the people beat them on foot from one shore to the other, running around the lake. I can't really account for these sailors that are in these boats, but apparently they weren't very good at it. People were faster on feet. And when they arrive, Jesus recognizes the second need, the need for leadership. Never mind that they were fatigued, never mind that they were exhausted. The crowds need a teacher. And it says that Jesus recognized it, his compassion. In fact, the root word for compassion is the word in Greek that means to have one's guts churned. When was the last time you had your guts churned? I can tell you, this week watching the news, my guts churned in compassion, driving me to want to be compassionate. Jesus recognized that the crowd were like sheep without a shepherd. I don't think we have a lot of shepherds in here, but if you know much about sheep, they kind of do their own thing. They wander off. They get themselves in all kinds of trouble without leadership. And that's what Jesus recognizes in this crowd. They need leadership. They need a shepherd. We're going to come to that image as we move into John's gospel over the next couple of weeks. I've always found it fascinating and moving and inspiring that Jesus, despite his grief, despite his fatigue, despite his weariness, is energized to meet the needs of people that are around him, the crowds, and feels deep compassion for them. Because when I'm fatigued and when I'm grieved, it's hard for me to access those kind of feelings, and I guess that's why I'm not Jesus and he is. The third need is the need for food. The disciples notice that it's getting kind of late and people are getting hungry. Here's why I come into the story. They come to Jesus and they want to have him give the final benediction, Head on out, folks. Thanks for a good day. Send them away, it says in the story that we missed in verse 36. Send them away that they might go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat. Now, I guess I get the idea that the crowd doesn't have enough money to buy what they need, but the disciples don't seem to really care about the fact that in these villages, this crowd of 5,000 people, it will tell us in Mark's gospel, are going to overwhelm the needs and resources of that particular place. Essentially, the disciples are saying, could you just get rid of them? We just need a little time alone. We really don't want to take care of this. They aren't our responsibility. They followed us here on foot. They're just a pesky crowd. Apparently, they don't have the same compassion as Jesus does as he looks over the crowd. Jesus sees the need of people and what God can meet in them. Human beings don't always do that. The disciples, they see obligation that they want to avoid. How much like us? The scene as it unfolds in this feeding of the 5,000 in Mark's chapter 6, the part that we skipped, is, it's kind of not unlike church potlucks in some ways that we've attended over the years. We have a smorgasbord of goods, don't we? They're scattered throughout the building. Jane is always busy putting it all together. We've got things in the kitchen. We've got Johnny's cheesecake in the wiggle room. We're all ready to go. It's tables laden with things that we probably shouldn't have eaten, but we're going to eat anyway. Meats and side dishes, salads of all kinds of types and kinds, desserts, an abundant feast. The key difference in the meal that Jesus is about to sit down with his disciples and this crowd and church suppers is this, that nobody brought much of anything to that potluck. Hence, Jesus ordered the disciples, you give them something to eat. Now, if you remember, they had something to eat, but they didn't have leisure to eat it. But I really doubt that they had enough for 5,000 people. When there were probably 12 to 20 people traveling in this entourage, I don't think they had Carl's Jr.'s worth of food sitting at their ready. But Jesus says, you give them something to eat. At his orders, the disciples begin to scout out resources among the crowd. They're meager, 5 loaves, 2 fish, and wrapped in paper. Pulled out of the pockets of some of the disciples and some of the people in the crowd. Jesus gives direction that they should sit down in certain groups, kind of like we do. If you're at the closest table to the right, you get to go first. Unfortunately, if you sit over here, you're going to go last. And so these people put Johnny's cheesecake first, right, Johnny? He says, sit them down. What? Life's uncertain, eat cheesecake first. Sit down in groups of hundreds and in 50s. There's 5,000 of them. He then looks up to heaven in a manner that's kind of reminiscent of the Eucharist. Jesus blesses and breaks the loaves and begins to distribute them with the fish. Part of the message that we're supposed to get out of a story like this maybe that we have a few crusts of bread in our pockets that we hadn't really thought about before. In other words, there are more resources in given situations than we really realize. And we know that to be true. When we've been pressed, we think we're without resource, we think we're without money, but as we scrounge around a little bit, we find a few dollars here in the change thing in the car. We search under the mattress, maybe where you hid some little money, maybe in the couch, and you find out that you can actually put some things together. There's always more resources than our circumstances seem to indicate to us. Sometimes we underestimate the value and contributions of other people only to realize them when they're gone. We consign elderly people to the has-been bin, not realizing the rich resources and wisdom that they yield into our lives. We dismiss our current circumstances, thinking the grass is always greener on the other side of the road, in another job, another marriage, another circumstance, another relationship, another church. But perhaps we underestimate the gifts that we possess ourselves. But what if within the confines of our situation, within the gifts and ability of people around us, within our own lives and buried within our own family heritage, there were untold resources, untold riches, untold wisdom, untold energy, untold inspiration? Then the message of our opening story would be true. Cast down your buckets where you are and find resources that you never imagined. And I think that's a helpful message, isn't it? I mean, that's at least from a human point of view, kind of a helpful message. It's true in many cases, but pressing the message a bit more, we realize that the focus isn't on the resources that we have. The focus instead, in this case, is on Jesus. God can do a great deal with a little bit, seems to be another message that we wring out of this passage. It focuses on Jesus as the source of our rest, the source of our leadership, the source of our nourishment. Have you ever been in a maybe a church conference or maybe a Bible study or maybe a worship time where it just all seems to come together, and when you leave it, you feel as if you have rested because you've been met by the presence of love in that experience? Now, church suppers bless food that is present and waiting on straining tables. Jesus' supper blesses food that's not present and yet still satisfies the hunger of the overflowing crowd. Now, I'm not one to really demystify sort of the miracle stories. I've never really liked that sort of thing. I have no desire to see this as a stone soup motif. You know, they got by on what they had, and that's the miracle of the story, though that probably is also somewhat true. I think it's more, see what happens with a little when the power of God is behind it. I do realize with age how little one person can do and accomplish in their life. And conversely, I recognize how ultimately important it is to offer that little bit. It's both liberating knowledge and motivating knowledge. Liberating to accept the fact that there are limits in a life. Motivating knowing that the little we give is important to those who are around us. And in the midst of that, liberating and motivating knowledge is the grace of God. Jesus blesses not several tables laden with cheesecake or all kinds of other delectables, groaning under the weight of our celebrations and our bounty that we brought and that we prepared and that we will enjoy. Instead, in the face of a massive crowd, he receives 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus' version of a church potluck, I guess, the Lord's Supper. It's a demonstration of God's grace for us. God doing in and through us things that we could not do on our own, whether it's motivating us to share or showing us the bounty of his grace. God moving mountains, as he would say, with faith the size of a grain of mustard seed. Cast down your buckets where they are. You can squeeze out a couple meanings to that. It may help us discover the resources we didn't realize were present in the situations we find ourselves in us. Cast down your buckets where they are is sure to help us discover the presence and the power of God in the depths of our experience, in the grace that fills the crack. This is the Lord's Supper, not just the bread and wine seated on this table, not just another church potluck supper. It's the invitation to come away and rest and to find refreshment and to find the meeting of our needs, the leadership and the nourishment that we need based upon his grace when we find ourselves in unfamiliar waters. It's the invitation to put down your buckets and be refreshed. What does it mean to rest in Jesus then? Amen. Folks, let's stand.